And well, let's head to the US to our correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease to tell us more of what is expected at the two-day summit. Sherwin, good evening. Welcome to the show. Joe Biden, during his campaign trail, promised that, hey, listen, I've got a $2 trillion plan on clean energy, an infrastructure plan as well, and a commitment to join the Paris Agreement and a goal of net zero emissions by 2030. Is this him making good on that promise?
This is certainly an attempt, Aldrin, to re-engage with the international community. Look, the domestic issues that you raise in terms of the infrastructure package that they're trying to get through Congress and the investment that will require and the implications on using greater green technology as you recalibrate and reposition the country towards a net zero future. I'm not sure it's going to happen by 2030. The UN has called for countries to reach net zero in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions, essentially getting to carbon neutrality is by 2050. A country like China, the second largest emitter in the world, or in fact the first, the greatest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world, has said that it will reach that goal by 2060. But this is very much an attempt by Biden to re-engage with the world. You'll remember, Aldrin, that in 2017, his predecessor, Donald Trump, withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And remember, this was one of the seminal international projects supported by the United States under the Obama-Biden administration. So there's a lot of grievance, I think, in the Biden administration now in terms of repositioning the United States as a leader on climate. And it also, of course, comes on International Mother Earth Day. The Secretary General releasing a statement earlier today ahead of the summit tomorrow. Let's watch.
As we mark International Mother Earth Day, our planet is at a tipping point. Humanity continues to abuse the natural world. We heedlessly plunder the Earth's resources, deplete its wildlife, and treat air, land, and seas as dumping grounds. Crucial ecosystems and food chains are being pushed to the brink of collapse. This is suicidal. We must end our war on nature and nurse it back to health. That means bold climate action to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius and adapt to the changes to come. It means stronger steps to protect biodiversity. And it means reducing pollution by building circular economies that drive down waste. These steps will safeguard our only home and create millions of new jobs. Recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic is a chance to set the world on a cleaner, greener, more sustainable path. On International Mother Earth Day, let us all commit to the hard work of restoring our planet and making peace with nature.
Some of the words he uses there, Aldrin: the abyss, the brink of collapse, suicidal, the urgency could not be more clear. And the United Nations and certainly the Biden administration, including looking at themselves, will be seeking to get world leaders in their opening session tomorrow, which President Cyril Ramaphosa will attend, really to up their ambition and really make clear what their nationally determined contributions are going to be in terms of this broader international project, which is about adaptation and mitigation, given the threats that climate change poses to the world.
Do we expect these global leaders to also make a declaration, or is it just reaffirming their national positions?
That is essentially the project. We still don't know. Despite you mentioning President Biden, then candidate Biden's proposals in terms of what he would do in government, it's a different ball game when you're running a campaign, and it's a different ball game, Aldrin, when you're in government. So we don't know yet what the nationally determined contribution of the United States is going to be in terms of limiting greenhouse gases and getting to the date at which they will get to carbon neutrality. So the expectation is that leaders are going to come here with commitments. The opening session is called Raising Our Climate Ambition. So how are you going to do that? That's what each leader is going to present in that opening session, starting around 2 p.m. Central African time tomorrow. And then, of course, another session called Investing in Climate Solutions. The issue of financing is very, very critical here. Remember, developing countries do not have the financing to use to invest in new technologies and to pay for the level of adaptation and mitigation that's required. That has to come from the developed world. They've agreed to do this. They established in 2010 a green climate fund that needs to be capitalized to the tune of $100 billion by 2020. If you look back at 2020, the $100 billion was not reached. So what is the role of public finance from the developed world? What is the role of private finance from the developed world in terms of the projects they finance? You talk about infrastructure. Are these infrastructure projects green compliant for the future that we seek? And another session that will be hosted tomorrow is called Adaptation and Resilience, how technology can be used and transferred to help poorer countries, developing countries better adapt given the lack of financing that they have.
Yeah. And just quickly, Sherwin, what we've seen also with South Africa, for instance, saying that, listen, we cannot at this point, for instance, say that we won't be using fossil fuel anymore. But then on the other end, you have financial institutions that are saying that, unfortunately, new projects that will be relying on fossil fuel, those won't be getting any financial injections. How do you see that conversation playing out at the global stage?
There's some language that you're going to hear, particularly from the developing world leaders. They will talk about a just transition. They will also talk about common but differentiated responsibilities. This is language that is built into the Paris Climate Change Accord. And essentially what it tells us is that smaller countries, developing countries, were not as responsible for emissions as some of the bigger nations, the more developed countries around the world. So they have a greater responsibility here in terms of rectifying the historic wrong. So common but differentiated responsibilities talks to the fact that everybody has a role to play here. But smaller, poorer countries do not have the financing required for the adaptation, for the mitigation, and that's where that Green Climate Fund comes in. What is your responsibility as developed countries? What is your responsibility as international financial institutions? We see that the African Development Bank president is going to be there. The World Bank president is going to be there. The IMF managing director is also going to be there. So how does the collective, the both public and private entities come together to help smaller developing countries meet this moment in terms of what is a just transition and in terms of the common but differentiated responsibilities that we all share? Different responsibilities based on your historic complicity in terms of the situation we face today.
Does the conversation at all also focus on the impact of the natural disasters from climate change and considering, for instance, developing nations relying a lot on tourism?
Look, that is the emergency, is it not? And the concern is that despite the wildfires that you're seeing, despite the flooding that you're seeing, hurricanes that don't just move along when they hit land, but sit and dump copious amounts of rain over a number of days, the level of devastation, the migration that happens as a result of droughts and people, particularly in rural parts of Africa, the Chad Basin, you were having a conversation about that region earlier, the shrinking Lake Chad and the impacts that has on your herders and your migratory, people seeking water for their cattle. These are the fundamentals of the damage that climate change is doing. And so the idea is that you need a global response on the level that you are seeing in terms of the current pandemic known as coronavirus, COVID-19. You are not seeing the level of urgency from global leaders as one would expect, given that climate change is a far more severe and catastrophic scenario than COVID-19 could ever be. So they want the level of commitment you're seeing in the short term in terms of what we've seen in the response to COVID-19 to be applied to the global response to climate change.
And of course, we've also seen the devastating impact that climate change has on the socio-economic conditions of many on the continent. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, thank you so much for your time. And that summit starts tomorrow. So it's a 2-day summit taking place in the United States. It will be a virtual summit which will be joined by at least 40 leaders from across the world.